It's the year 1905. We meet our hero, Thomas Richardson, as he reads a letter requesting ransom for his apparently abducted sister Jennifer. A priest tells him to keep calm and not to give them the money, but instead pretend to be one of them and rescue his sister by infiltrating their cult. We see him boarding a boat to an isolated island as he makes his way toward his sister. A woman remarks that she hasn't seen him in any of their prayer meetings. He deflects, saying he doesn't remember either, and the journey continues. When they reach the dock, noticing his ticket has a mark, he switches passes with another unsuspecting traveler whose luggage is marked with an X. He incorporates himself with their lifestyle, and we notice a lot of odd practices. For one, they seem to bleed themselves as a form of sacrifice every night, and we know it's a religious cult that seems to imitate Christianity. But the differences are startling. They refer to prayer meetings, but their services held by a self-proclaimed prophet seem very odd and self-centered. Malcolm Howe and two other prisoners, Frank and Quinn, founded the cult. They assert that blood sacrifice made the formerly infertile island fruitful. Every cult member has a jar for routine bloodletting. Thomas inspects the island, trying to get information that would give him a lead on his sister. And he doesn't find much of anything he understands, but he does run into a couple having a tryst. Before he goes to bed, we see Thomas taking a substance thought to be laudanum. Often known as opium tincture, it is made of opium powder and alcohol. The next morning, a banging sound on his door wakes Thomas. He gets up, bare-chested, to open the door, and we see grotesque markings on his back, indicating precious torture. What Thomas doesn't know is that the man he switched passes with has been brutally murdered, even though they know he's not the intruder they once suspected. It's basically a cover-up as they search for him. Thomas ends up pitching in terms of work, and ends up with Jeremy, the man he caught saying goodbye to his lover. Since the cult lacks the funds to support the ongoing animal sacrifices required to keep the island fertile, he coerces Jeremy into admitting that Jennifer, whom Malcolm is presenting to cult members as a captured spy, was abducted for ransom. Using his knowledge of the tryst as an edge, he asks Jeremy what he knows about his sister, and he confesses that she's indeed on the island, but offers some very strange advice. He tells Thomas not to pay the ransom. Taking this advice, Thomas tells Jeremy that he must be his ally henceforth, or he'd expose him and Fionn. When they return to the island center, the prophets call for a meeting of newcomers. We see Thomas kneeling along with the people with him on the boat. It's the ultimate test. The prophet, Malcolm, starts quoting verses from the Holy Book, and each person is to recite them one by one. It's getting to Thomas' turn, and he's extremely nervous. Luckily, the person before him is a spy sent to the island by the king to wreak vengeance. Just as the spy reaches out with a knife in his hand to kill Malcolm, Thomas, acting on instinct, tries to stop him and gets hurt in the process, but he gives the prophet's gods just enough time to spear the spy through. It's the perfect circumstance because Thomas avoids getting caught and supposedly proves his loyalty to Malcolm. Thomas gets seriously injured in the process, and Malcolm orders someone to stitch up his wounds. Turns out that someone is his only daughter who learned the art of medicine from her late mother's brother. After stitching up his wounds, Thomas gets Andrea as an ally. The following evening, Malcolm parades Jennifer through the community, threatening to kill her if her accomplice does not come forward. Thomas watches as she's starved and ridiculed, but can do nothing about it if he has any hopes of saving her. Andrea proves herself to be compassionate as she wards the children torturing Jennifer and feeds her. He bides his time, and eventually his patience pays off. The next evening, a feast is held for some strange reason, and Thomas ventures out with a plan. During one of his island inspections, he notices Malcolm going to a cave-like structure with a passage underground. He plans to go to the location while the celebration is going on and save his sister. He recruits Jeremy for this rescue mission to be the lookout, but Jeremy's father, Frank, another founding prophet, finds him and manages to keep him hidden. He, Malcolm, and Quinn had actually planned the feast as a trap, knowing fully well that the intruder would see it as an opportunity to rescue Jennifer. Thomas, far ahead, has already set out underground in a tunnel under Malcolm's house and encounters a bloody mess down there. To make it worse, a scary-looking elderly woman pops up out of nowhere and starts chasing him. He finds refuge in a beach cave with signs of a deity on the island, including interesting mockings. Malcolm, furious that Thomas escaped, chastises the goddess for coming to Thomas before being fed when he goes to a barn where she is trapped in tree roots. We find out that she's being held prisoner and being fed to make the people on the island thrive. While Thomas is hiding in a beach cave, Andrea comes to him, and the two get acquainted and discuss the concept of divinity. We find out that Thomas used to be a priest but abandoned religion when he barely survived a mission trip to Peking. He claims to have been a Christian missionary who was persecuted in Peking during the Boxer Rebellion for bringing Christianity to China, and ultimately lost his faith as a result. She hides with him in a cabin in a wheat field to avoid her father's wrath. When Finn tells Jeremy she's expecting, surprisingly, Jeremy is overjoyed even though they are not allowed to be together. He tells her that Frank wants to leave the island, and the two decide to elope. Quinn, upset, corners Finn and gets her to confess that she's indeed pregnant. In a bloody rage, she shouts at her and proceeds to kill, claiming she carries an abomination, not a child. The scene is extremely gory as he tears her apart, slicing through her and splashing blood everywhere. Unfortunately, Jeremy walks in just as Quinn is done killing her and sees red. He pounced on Quinn to get revenge, but in the end, Quinn overpowers him. Guards apprehend Quinn after Jeremy stabs him. He makes an appealing case, though, saying Jeremy killed Finn and tried to kill him as well. Since Malcolm is nowhere to be found, Quinn takes over as the prophet and kills Jeremy with a purification ceremony after accusing him of killing Finn. He uses a torture device to drill into Jeremy's head and places a rose right in his brain's remains. Quinn accuses Malcolm of being a false prophet and insists that he kill Thomas to show his mettle. Thomas is able to flee after Quinn is attacked by Frank, who is furious about his son's passing. What everyone doesn't know is that while Quinn was killing Jeremy, Malcolm was trying to convince Frank not to deflect and leave the island and go back to the mainland by giving him hope and restoring his faith. After running away, Frank and Thomas find the barn where the goddess is imprisoned. Frank is livid because his only son is killed and goes radical. He tries to kill the goddess but fails. Thomas sees the grinder, a disguised man, force-feeding Jeremy's body to the goddess as he kills Frank, who had entered intending to kill the goddess. He sneaks past and discovers Jennifer in a sack, still alive but bound. He is knocked out after a very gruesome fight as soon as he releases her. He discovers hooks in his hands and legs tying him to a meat grinding table. He literally fights for his life as the grinder constantly pushes his body towards the machine, but he prevails and kills him after escaping. Quinn admits that he imprisoned the goddess after he and Malcolm became aware of her abilities to capture Jennifer and Andrea. He insists he should have been the one in charge, the prophet. He intends to continually conceive them and offer their children as sacrifices. And he'll overthrow Malcolm and be the new face of the faith. The goddess reveals her relationship with the cult to Thomas and asks him to release her. She shows him her pain and how she's been trapped there for a long time, held prisoner against her will. We see him fulfill her wish by setting her on fire. Meanwhile, on the island, all hell breaks loose. Everything is crumbling. It's a full-on war with everyone running for their lives. After a tense bloody fight, Quinn is eventually overpowered and killed by Thomas, Andrea, and Jennifer, with Thomas receiving numerous stab wounds. At this point, no one, not even us, is sure he will make it. Before collapsing, he leads Jennifer and Andrea to the boats and bids them farewell as they flee. They hurry towards the last boat and make it just as the island explodes in flames, but Malcolm and Jeremy remain there even though everyone else is gone. Now that his faith has been restored, Malcolm, who has been hurt, finds Thomas. The foliage around Thomas expands and infuses into his flesh as he bleeds onto the ground. Then, emerging as the new guardian of the island, his eyes assume the goddess' appearance in both shape and color. What do you think of this 2018 period folk horror film? A hit or a miss? Do you think the ending is appropriate? Tell us in the comments.